I'll be so glad when the sun goes down. When the sun goes down, I'll be so glad.
Prior to the Civil War in the early 1800s to the mid-1800s, Harriet Tubman lived in a time of slavery and no equal rights, a time for African Americans to rise. Harriet Tubman, the most famous abolitionist, changed the lives for many slaves through the Underground Railroad. Because of her hard childhood, Harriet Tubman was well prepared to overcome racism and brutality. African Americans were enslaved and were not seen as people but as things. Slavery was legal in the South but illegal in the North. This law caused a lot of slaves in the South to try to escape and travel up north to achieve their freedom. These slaves were known as fugitive slaves. Sometime in 1822, Harriet Tubman was born. Harriet was first named Araminta, but then later changed her name due to slavery and marriage. Harriet was born into slavery and was a slave up until 1849 when she was 27 years old. At that age, she decided to run away. Harriet then traveled up north and began to live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where she worked at a hotel as a maid. After Harriet had reached freedom, she said, "I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came up like a gold through the trees, and I felt like I was in heaven." She then began to feel guilty for leaving all of her family behind in the South, knowing that they are still suffering as slaves. She came to realization that it wasn't just her family that was suffering. It was all of the other slaves as well. A famous quote from Harriet is, "There was one of two things I had a right to, liberty or death. If I could not have one, I would have the other."
I'm in a world of trouble, you won't lie to me.
Harriet began working with the Underground Railroad. This is a network of people, routes, and hiding places that enabled slaves to escape to the north.
Harriet had a gift for following the stars and for finding the routes that the men had described in their stories about fugitive slaves leaving their plantations and going up to the north. It took Harriet a week to travel 120 miles to Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. This was one of the 15 free states in the North where slavery was illegal. In between Harriet's journeys, she worked at hotels and restaurants, saving money she would need to buy food and other supplies for her rescue missions. But then she was officially part of the Underground Railroad.
Hundreds of people were a part of the Underground Railroad, including wealthy white people, Christian ministers, housewives, farmers, free black people, and slaves. Throughout the Underground Railroad, they would communicate with special code words and signals.
In 1850, only a few months after working on the Underground Railroad, Harriet was made an official conductor. This meant that she knew all the routes to the free territory, and she had to take an oath of silence so the secret of the Underground Railroad would be kept a secret.
Helping a runaway slave was against the law, even in free states. So helping a fugitive slave was very dangerous and risked many people's lives, including Harriet's.
In 1850, when the fugitive slave law was passed, Tubman decided to lead her charges all the way to Canada, since that way they would immediately be free. Only after 6 years of working on the Underground Railroad, in 1856, Harriet was one of the most wanted fugitive slaves out there. She was so wanted that her capture price was raised to $40,000, which was a lot of money back then. Even though Harriet was smart, she was very harsh. She wouldn't let anyone turn around and go back to their master, and if they attempted to, she would threaten to kill them. Her favorite quote to the slaves she would say if they would ask to go back was to die or to keep moving. Harriet's leadership became so famous among the slaves that they began to call her Moses. because she was leading everyone to the Promised Land, also known as the North. In total, she made 19 trips to the South and helped freed over 300 people, including all 4 of her brothers and their families and her parents. With the coming of the Civil War, Harriet Tubman stopped working on the railroad. For 3 years, she served the North, working as a nurse in Florida and South and North Carolina, caring for both black and white patients. She also worked as a spy and a scout because her appearance made it easy for her to walk through enemy lines. She was then given command of small corps of black soldiers under the authority of Colonel James Montgomery. On March 10, 1913, Harriet Tubman died. Harriet Tubman's legacy still stands today, with people knowing about her determination and bravery she had to help all these slaves and help lead them to freedom in the North. She was a strong and a courageous woman, but did all of this out of the kindness of her heart and her faith in God.
Being strong and courageous was not all of her success. It was her leadership of being a kind woman, but at the same time knowing what she wanted to achieve. Slavery officially ended on December 6, 1865, the day the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified.
Harriet was a leader like no other, and changed the lives of many slaves and made people change their minds about slavery. Her determination to end racism impacted our lives today.
And without Harriet's leadership, slavery might have lasted longer than anyone would have expected.
One of Harriet's good friends, Frederick Douglass, who was also an abolitionist, once said about Harriet, "I know of no one who has willingly encountered more perils and hardships to serve our enslaved people."
Harriet's legacy will forever stand as the woman who never backed down and reached her goal of freeing slaves. Thanks to Harriet, white people are not enslaving African Americans anymore, and racism isn't as common as it used to be in the 1800s. Today, racism is still alive and continues to be a problem in our society. It is important for our society today to be educated on slavery in the 1800s and most importantly on Harriet. People should know about Harriet because she was the leader in the 1800s who wanted to change for her people, and she acquired her goal.
Even though today racism has not ended entirely, Harriet Tubman still is known for being the greatest abolitionist during the Civil War.
Every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars to change the world.